post them on our Ask the Experts forum, so please bear with us. With this in mind, can you please try to keep your questions focused on the topic in general, as we don't plan to be able to answer specific questions relating to your products during the webinar. So, without any more ado, can I introduce Claire Harrison and Michelle Sullivan from the Export Controls Office, who are today's presenters. Over to you.
Hello everyone. As Ian said, I'm Claire Harrison and I work for the Export Control Organisation. I'm head of the Business Awareness Unit, and my team look after all of the outreach facilities and all the training for all different size companies in terms of export controls. I'm joined by Michelle Sullivan. Michelle is one of our licensing officers and she used to work on the helpline, and I'm sure many of you will have seen her from her helpline days. We've got quite a lot of information to be giving you today, so I'm going to start now because there's a fair few slides we have to get through. As Ian said, in terms of the questions, we're happy to take questions online and after the event, because I'm sure you'll probably have quite a lot after we've finished speaking. Can we have the second slide, please? Okay, so in our first webinar, we looked at the key indicators for determining whether a license was required for your export. We started with classifying your goods. License you should apply for to enable your goods to get to market quickly and efficiently. Next slide, please. In deciding which license that you should be using, you will need to be aware of whether the country where your export will ultimately land is a sanctioned destination. The reason sanctions are imposed is political, and they are a direct result of specific concerns international governments may have about the risks of unrest or security or human rights abuses. Sanctions cover a range of measures and are put in place by various different organisations, for instance, the United Nations or the EU, or even by specific countries. They can be trade-related and can control military, dual use, and even non-controlled items. For instance, the sanctions imposed on Iran as a result of concerns about their nuclear program meant that there was prohibition on exports of equipment and material for the oil and gas industry in Iran. These were previously unlicensable items. You can find the list of sanctioned destinations on gov.uk. This detailed guide will provide all you need to know about what goods are prohibited and which goods require a license for specific countries. This may mean you will require a license. Please remember the use of open general licenses will be revoked for sanctioned destinations. We may also revoke seals and oils if there is a sanction which is put in place. Next slide, please. The main types of license that we have: open general licenses, standard individual licenses, and open individual licenses. We're going to focus the webinar today on these three types of licenses. We'll outline the benefits and features of the licenses. You'll also hear about the Spire licensing system several times during the course of the webinar, as this is the ECO platform to make applications and register for open licenses. We'll also cover licenses for transshipment, trade controls, and global projects. Next slide, please. As a recap, the classification of your export against the Consolidated Control List is a very good start to determining which licence you could apply for. Trade names are not included in the controls, and therefore you're going to need a generic description of your goods to identify an appropriate entry. The control lists are available on the gov.uk website. When using the list, always make sure you have the latest version. The list is updated on a regular basis, and as you will see from the screenshot of the latest list, it's dated December 2015. You will need your control list entry to make applications for standard individual export licences. Knowing the entry also makes it easy to check whether there are any open general licences to meet your export needs. My first tip of the day is that if you're looking to find out where your goods sit on any of these control lists, you should use the Goods Checker, which is an online checking tool, or you can use the search tool, which is available on Spire. And if you weren't able to listen into the webinar on Tuesday about the control lists, you can find a link to it on the Open to Export website. Next slide, please. As well as controls on the finished items, there are also UK and European export legislation requiring a licence to export certain types of technology. UK legislation controls the sorts of technology related to military end use, also to certain arms embargoes or unauthorised military exports. It can take the form of tangible technology, for instance blueprints and those things that you can see on the screen, but it also controls intangible technology. To give you an idea about that, that is the information which is either on or in various forms. For instance, a memory stick, in emails, a telephone call, on a laptop or on other mobile devices. The controls for military-related software and technology are covered by the control list entries ML21 and ML22. Under EU legislation, there are also controls on certain dual-use items for technology, and you can find these controls in the relevant control list entries under subcategory E in each main category on the dual-use list. Next slide, please. Open licenses. We will always advise that you should look to use an open general license before looking at other licenses. These are pre-published licenses and where we have set the parameters of permissible goods and permissible countries. They also include specific conditions of use. The benefits to using an open license are that there is a one-off registration which is available online. There's an immediate use of the license on registration, and you don't have a waiting time to receive the license. You can use it straight away. You must make sure you record the details on your shipping documentation and ship the goods. Other types of benefits, provided the conditions are adhered to, include several things. A wide range of permitted destinations which are both in the EU and outside the EU. There's no limit on the use of the license. You can use it as many times as you want. There's also no timescale limits. With the other licenses, we do have timescale limits. And provided the destination countries remain in scope, those timescale limits will continue. There's also a coverage for a range of different situations that you may need in terms of your particular export. And these relate to both the export of military and dual-use exports. Next slide, please. So how do you know whether the OGIL that you're looking at actually fits your export? Well, you may be able to use an open general license if you're exporting certain military items. For instance, military goods, software and technology, military components, and software and source code for military goods. As you can see on the screen here, this is a screenshot of the gov.uk page which lists all of the open general licenses that are available for you to use. There's listings of these for both military and for dual use. Next slide, please. If you're not exporting military items, we do have a range of military OGELs available. I've just put a few of them up here because this is what the screen would allow me to do. So just to be clear, these are the types of goods that include oil and gas exploration equipment, and you'll find these types of goods under the dual use listing under categories 5, 6, 7 and 8. You might be exporting chemicals, you might be exporting cryptography development software or technology for dual use or military goods, and there's even an open general license for certain low value dual use items. Bear in mind that low value means that the shipment doesn't exceed a total value of £6,000. Alternatively, you might want to use one of these dual use items if you're exporting to exclusive destinations. For instance, dual use goods to UK forces deployed in embargoed or non-embargoed destinations, or dual use items going to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, which is an EU licence, or dual use items going to Turkey. We've even got a dual use OGEL for items which are not caught in any of the other OGELs, and that's called OGEL X. So you might want to check that one out as well. Next slide, please. I've put up a screenshot here of one of our latest licenses. These licenses have been developed with direct collaboration with Tech UK, where it was seen there was a need for open general licenses for printed circuit boards for dual use items and printed circuit boards for military goods. So if you've got anything in these fields for which you wish to apply for a license, do check these two out. Okay, next slide, please. There are various open licenses for any contracts that you have which involve UK government overseas. So for instance, if you're exporting for specific contracts and treaties, there are licenses for exporting or transferring certain military items in support of UK government defence contracts, for exporting under the US-UK Defence Trade Cooperation Treaty, for military items in support of Joint Strike Fighter F-35 Lightning II, or military goods in support of the A400M Collaborative EU project, or the Typhoon Collaborative project. You must remember that for these particular open licenses where there are government contracts involved, you will need to have approval from the MOD in the form of an F680 and an F1686. Those are approvals which are the responsibility of the MOD, and you'll find all details of them in the appropriate open license. Okay, next slide, please. So then we also have particular activities. So if you're if you're involved in arranging the shipment of goods which have been in the UK for a particular exhibition, there's an open license for re-exporting those items after the exhibition. Similarly, there are various open licenses which involve the repair and replacement of items that you have sold and for which there is a warranty for them. So for instance, if you've had to repair something under a previous contract and you're re-exporting it under warranty, then you can have an open general license for it. Or similarly, if you need to have an item which has been purchased from overseas and you need to export it to be repaired, there's an open general license for that. There are also open licenses for exporting military goods for an exhibition and for exporting military goods for demonstration. If you're temporarily exporting items for commemorative exhibitions, for instance, historic military goods or historic military vehicles and artillery, there are also specific open licenses for those. Please remember that these licenses are valid for a very short period, and that's between 3 and 6 months. So you will need to check to see whether those particular licenses meet your needs. But as I said, those are only those temporary licenses. The other open licenses, there's no timescale attached to those. Finally, in addition, there's a dual-use open license which contains certain items which have recently been decontrolled from the EU dual-use regulation. So, I'm sure you'll agree that that covers a wide range of exporting requirements. I've tried to ensure, in talking to you about these, that I've covered most of the military and dual-use OGELs, but you will need to check on the gov.uk website to see whether there's an actual open licence that meets your requirements. You can get a full listing of them on gov.uk, and I'll probably talk about how to facilitate that search later on. But what I want to have a look at and think about now is how can you be sure that one of these is going to be appropriate to you so you can get exporting immediately? First of all, what I'd suggest, and these are my steps for deciding whether or not you need a license. First of all, I'd suggest that you should know the classification of your military and dual-use items. And for this, I would suggest that the first thing you should do is talk to your own technical team. They're the ones that will be able to know about the capabilities and the parameters of the items for what you want to export, because only once you've got the correct parameters can you decide whether or not there's a control list entry for any of your goods. And again, I would suggest that you use the goods checker or the online search facility to help determine then what the control list entry is. So having identified what your control list entry is, my next hint on all of this would be consider what activity you're actually trying to undertake. For instance, is it a direct export for sale of goods or transfer and technology? Is it an export after a UK exhibition or after repairing goods? Or is it a temporary exportation for demonstration, exhibition, or any type of oil exploration? So as I say, check to see what sort of activity you actually want to undertake. What you then need to do, step 3, is to ensure the country where the goods will be sent or finally used are included as a permitted destination on the OGL for which you want to use. And my step 4 will always be print off the open license, print off the open general license from your machine and read it. You can't get a better understanding of the license unless you read it. Okay, can we have the next slide, please?
Regarding the open general export licenses, the UK has over 50 licenses. However, there are 6 licenses that have been introduced by Europe, which we refer to as the EU GEAs or the General Export Authorizations. These are known as union licenses, which are valid in all member states. So in other words, a company established in one member state may export from that or any other member state, including the UK, under the authority of the EU GEA, providing that you comply with its conditions and any additional requirements by the member state. So if you're in the UK and you want to export from Germany, France or any other member state, you apply for one of these 6 licenses in the UK and you can use it from any other member state. However, the difference between the General Export Authorizations and the UK OGELs are that you will have to access each individual license via the EC regulation that it was printed under. Next slide, please. Originally, EU 001, which covers dual-use goods, the text was printed in Council Regulation number 428 of 2009. The main terms and conditions of the licence are under Annex 2, as you can see from the slide in front of you. Regarding EU 002 to EU 006, the text for those licences can be found under EC Regulation 1232 of 2011. All the text for these licences you will have to print off via the regulation and then from that check to see if you can meet the terms and conditions. But these general export authorizations or union licenses are very flexible, as you can export from any other member state once you've applied for them in the UK. Next slide.
Okay. What I want to do now is to actually take you through the issues of how to read an open general license. The reason I'm doing this is because when our compliance officers come out to visit companies, one of the areas that they're most concerned about is a feeling that you're not really sure about what's contained within the open general license. So let's have a look at how you can actually read the OGL. What I'd strongly suggest here is go through the steps 1 to 4, which we've spoken about already. And if you do all that, you should be looking at an OGL which meets your own particular export requirements for a specific shipment. I went through steps 1 to 4 earlier, and this is the open general license that I'm actually looking at in terms of trying to read. It's the open general license for military goods, software and technology. And what it will do is highlight where there are some differences with the technology for dual use licenses. So section 1 of this license is just a purpose of the license. It's a brief background on the limits of the open license and the recommendation that you read the whole open license before registering to use it. Again, you'll hear a theme coming here, I think. Okay, next slide, please. This is the section in section 2 where you'll find a listing of the classifications for which you may be able to use this license. So this is a military license, but clearly if it's a dual use license, then the listing of goods there will be under the EU dual use goods classification, not the military list. And this will be a listing of goods that you can actually use the license for. Please remember that the use of the OGLs for military and dual use goods is mutually exclusive. So if you've got a mixed shipment, then you need to ensure that you've got the right open licenses to actually cover the total shipment. Okay, next slide, please. This is another, a few more listing of the goods that you can actually use the license for. And the reason that I'm putting this one up is really to show you that there are some exclusions as well as permissions. So please read this carefully. For instance, under ML9 we have all goods under this category, but not including complete vessels. ML10 is the heading for aircraft. So this particular heading reads all goods under this category, but not including complete aircraft or complete unmanned aerial vehicles or components specially designed or modified for unmanned aerial vehicles. So please read carefully the exclusions that may apply. Some control list entries will also include a subnote about the limitations on the end use of the items. So please read the actual entries very, very clearly. Okay, can we have a look at the next slide, please? This slide brings you down to section 3 of the open license. As you can see, it will list a set of countries for which the OGL is going to be permissible to be used. So other than the exclusive destination OGLs, which I mentioned earlier, for instance, Hong Kong, Turkey, etc., all the other open licenses will either give you this range of permitted destinations or a range of destinations for which the OGL cannot be used. So you must ensure that the end destination for your shipment is included as permitted. And please remember, by looking at the note at the bottom of the screen, you're not permitted to ship the goods to a customs-free zone in your country of destination. They must enter the country via the official customs entry point. That's if you're using an open general license. Okay, can we have a think about the next section, which is section 4. This will include limitations on who you can export to using the license. So there may be a listing of end users in the country of destination, or it may limit you about the use by permitted government or armed forces. So again, you must carefully read section 4. Next slide, please. On section 5, you'll find various other restrictions that you need to have a look at. This particular restriction that I've put up here is the requirement to have the appropriate MOD approval if the contract involves goods, software or technology of a security classification of official sensitive or above. And remember, this also includes UK material classified restricted. So if your particular business is involved in that sort of thing, then you'll need to have the appropriate MOD permissions as well. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? When you're using the OGL, there'll also be a requirement for compliance. Now this is a shot of gov.uk page where you can find all of the information about compliance and enforcement of export controls. But what I want to talk about around here is your requirement to actually register with Spire about where you're going to keep your records. There'll be a requirement to have an original undertaking from the person or entity, the consignee undertaking, confirming the export is for a permitted use. In case of government-to-government contracts or NATO contracts, you must provide a purchase order or an excerpt of contract number and goods classification that can be checked against the controller's classification. Section 7 of the OGL will be the commercial documents for physical export. That will give you a listing of all the commercial documentation that you need to have to remain compliant. You must update the open licensing return in Spire for all relevant exports and trade carried out within each calendar year. Update returns are due by the last date of the following January. And remember that that doesn't include technology transfers. In terms of the record, Section 8 will tell you that the listing of all records must be kept for a period of 4 years and made available for inspection by BIS, by one of your compliance officers. The records must keep dates and destinations of the export, the details of the consignee, a description of the goods, original undertaking, for instance the purchase order or excerpt of contract, the classification of the goods and the copy of commercial documentation. That's in terms of your record keeping, but please, as I say, have a look at the slide on compliance and enforcement of controls. There's a very handy guide on here which actually covers all of these things. Can we have the next slide, please? As you can be aware, there's quite a lot of laws that are associated with export controls. And it is, as the exporter, it's your obligation to adhere to all the relevant laws and all the relevant acts, which includes the obligation not to export goods, software and technology in breach of UN or EU arms embargoes. You'll get a full listing of that legislation by looking at that particular page, overview of export control legislation. And here I must make it clear that if you fail to meet the terms and conditions of any of the licenses, after audit, you must follow the steps that are set out in any warning letters to ensure you move to compliance. ECO may suspend or withdraw your authorization to use the license if you don't comply. And if suspended, you mustn't use the license in future. So it's in your interest to ensure that you do use it in the right way. But my final hint on all of this, because that's taken me about 10 minutes to go through the reading of the OGL, my hint on all of this would be, if you want to find out whether there's an OGL that meets your particular export, you can simply use the OGL checker tool, which is an online tool available on gov.uk and available on Spire. And it will automatically tell you whether there's any OGLs which meet your needs. The other thing that might be of interest to you, a few years ago we did a quite useful short film on YouTube. It was called Open Licenses Explained, and it takes you through the steps of the open license, and it actually talks you through what a compliance meeting is all about. It's quite an interesting watch, and you might recognise a few faces on there having done this webinar this afternoon. Okay, can we have the next slide, please?
When there's no open general export licence available, you have the option to apply for an open individual export licence. This is a type of licence issued by ECO, which is more flexible and tailored to an exporter's need. Oils allow a named exporter to export multiple shipments of specific goods to specific countries, subject to meeting detailed terms and conditions. An oil can potentially save you time and money, and we have 5 predetermined oils: dealer to dealer, cryptographic, UK continental shelf, media, and through life support of military goods. The dealer to dealer oil is predetermined, and it allows you to ship to any dealer within the other member states any type of firearms, accessories, or ammunition. You are subject to report to the Home Office, and there are certain guidelines on there. Cryptographic oil, this licence can be used to export certain cryptographic hardware and software to various countries. The UK continental shelf is for offshore installation, and the media oil will allow you to ship things like body armour, etc., which are required for aid workers and journalists while in war-torn areas. The Through Life Support military goods oil is a new one that has been introduced since February 2015. Following the initial export of a military platform, vehicle, aircraft, ship, major equipment such as weapons, this oil will authorise companies subsequent exports of systems, subsystems, components for the platform or major system. If required, it will last for 15 years, and it will last you really for the lifetime of the goods that you've shipped. If these predetermined oils are not suitable, you can apply for one of the tailor-made, either military or dual-use goods, listing various destinations and types of goods. However, you may need to remember that if you apply for an open individual export licence for Europe, we will issue that for a 3-year period. Any destination outside the EU will be issued to you and will last for 5 years. The oil application process takes a minimum of 60 working days, whereas before you needed to have at least 20 applications within a year to each destination. We have dropped the requirement to make them more flexible and hopefully promote the usage of these oils for companies. All you will need to do is supply a business case to us explaining why you require this open license. If issued to you, it will last either the 3 or 5 years, and as Claire was talking about compliance and record keeping, any type of open individual license, you will be subject to compliance visits. Would you like to move on to the next slide, please? Looking for a more detailed guidance, you will see that on our website we have step-by-step guidance on the updated oil process, what is required and what you will need to submit when applying for one of these open licenses. Could I please have the next slide? Now, every oil will require an undertaking. However, they're not the same as the end user undertakings. They must be obtained in advance from each of your customers. They are valid for 12 months, be on headed note paper, signed with ink, not electronic signature, specify the items, clearly indicate the intended application, and state the declaration. We have a consignee template on our system, and this is one of the requirements that you need to keep for when we have compliance visits in the future. If we can move on to the next slide, please. The benefit of applying for an open licence is it's valid for 5 years. We are completing 99% within 60 working days. However, they can take up to 120 days dependent on how many destinations are listed on this licence. Also, you may want to, in the interim period, apply for a standard licence while waiting. It does enable you to have multiple goods lines and a range of specified end users, and the application forms are on Spire. Justification, as in invitations to tender, contracts, etc., are useful when you upload them with the application, but everything is listed on the guidance and links will be provided at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. If open licence are not available, we have standard individual export licences. These are tailored for specific end users and specific quantities of goods. Regarding applying for a standard individual export licence, there is detailed guidance on our website. We are completing 70% of standard individual licences within 20 working days, and any other licences that are for a more sensitive destination may take slightly longer. On average, export control handles around 15,000 of these licence applications per year. They are valid for a 2-year period, and you will need to supply an end user undertaking or a stockist undertaking with every standard individual export licence. Next slide, please. Each stockist undertaking must list the goods, the consignee, the end user, signed and dated and on letter-headed paper. We will not process any standard licence without this document. However, if your end user is a government entity, we can, in lieu of an undertaking, accept purchase order or part of contract that covers types of goods, delivery quantities. On to the next slide, please. As stated a moment ago, each undertaking needs to contain certain information. However, at the end we have links that will lead you onto the types of undertakings, the templates. They are templates. As long as you include every area, they can be either used on our template or in letter form, but you must ensure that you have the declaration for each undertaking, as we cannot accept it from any other member state. It must be the UK document. Next slide, please. There are various other licenses which I'll quickly summarise now, but details can be found on the Gov UK site. Transshipment licenses are licenses which are not really used that often, but if goods are transshipped in the UK and they don't meet the exemption requirements, you can apply for one of these. We also have trade control licenses, either predetermined open general trade control licenses or standard individual trade control licenses. Trade controls, or the overseas trade, also known as trafficking and brokering in military or dual-use goods, require specific licenses. So, if you or your business is involved in the transfer of controlled goods between one overseas country and another, in other words, if a deal is brokered either in the UK by you or your business based overseas, you will need a trade control license. Also, if you are a foreign company but you employ UK nationals, trade control licenses will also be needed in that scenario. Full details are on our Gov UK website. Regarding temporary licenses, a temporary seal will allow you to send goods out for exhibition, demonstration, promotion and many other reasons. You do not need any undertaking. However, These licenses only last 12 months from the date of issue. So when you apply for temporary seals, remember that if the goods are going to be out of the UK for longer than a 2-year period, please ensure that you put in a permanent licence. All the applications are available on the Spire system. Next slide, please.
If you want to apply for any of these licenses, you will need to be using the Spire system. Spire is quite an interesting database. It's not just for licenses. You can also use it for the control list search tool. You can use it to find information about the end user advice service. We haven't talked about that today, but the end user advice service will give you detailed information about the risk of you doing business with a particular end user. We can check your end users out. You can also make your open license registrations on Spire, and you can obviously apply for your MOD F680 applications on Spire as well. In addition to that, what you should be doing in applying for Spire is to make a company registration so that all of your details are actually retained in the system, and you can then actually make your applications and clone them so you don't have to repeat text for future similar applications. There's quite a lot of flexibility associated with this Spire platform. And so if you're interested in finding more out about Spire, please do join us for next week's webinar, which is going to be on Spire and will help you to actually make better applications. Next slide, please. Okay, we're coming to the end of our webinar now. So what I'd like you to do is just have a look at the sort of help that's available. And I hope you can see that we don't have a shortage of information which we already put out there in the public domain. We've got a whole range of detailed guides on gov.uk which will help you understand the different types of licenses and which license is best for you. You will also find access to the goods checker on the gov.uk website, and we've got a couple of DVDs out there in the public domain that you can use to find out more about exporting. The Business Awareness Unit, which I run, actually does a series of training courses around the country. We have these based in London, and we run them all around the country. If you're interested in getting more detailed training on the use of licenses, on finding out more about sanctioned destinations, then please do have a look at our training bulletin on the gov.uk website. Next slide, please. I think that's the end. So if anybody's got any questions for us, Michelle and I would be happy to take them.
Well, thank you very much, Claire, and thank you to Michelle. We've had quite a few questions in during the course of the webinar, and as I said, quite a few before the webinar. So I will try and ask you some of these on behalf of people over the next few minutes. Right, we've had a question. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. We've had a question in from Arnie, who is asking, do I need to obtain an export control license if I deliver UK dual-use items to a UK economic zone, for example, an oil rig?
Yes. Sorry, this is Michelle. Yes. The UK continental shelf or any other continental shelf is not classed as the UK for export purposes. We pointed out earlier that there is actually an oil and gas or a UK continental shelf OGEL, which we've actually compiled to suit the types of goods that go out to an oil rig. So it's worth looking at the oil and UK continental shelf OGEL regarding that.
Great, thanks. I think that comprehensively answers that question for us. Right, Joanne has asked, can she use an open license before registering for it as long as she registers within 30 days?
So, yes, there is a term and condition in most of the OGELs that state that if using the license, please contact Secretary of State within 30 days of export. If you haven't registered to use the OGEL, all she will have to do is, when shipping the goods, on her export documentation, just write on the top of the paperwork, these goods are being exported under EU001 or whatever the title of the license is. Once registered to use an OGEL, we usually issue you with a license number within a day or two that you're ready to go. Sometimes the license number is issued on the same day, but if the term and condition says the 30-day rule, then yes, you've got the 30-day rule. You can use it and register within that 30-day period.
Thank you very much for answering that one. Right, we've got a question from Brian here. He's asking, with regards to the end user statements being in original form, is there absolutely no provision for use of a PDF version?
Regarding the end user undertakings for standard individual licenses, they are uploaded on Spire, so it is a PDF. What happens is we have the right to request to see the original, and the terms and conditions of all of the licenses state that you must have the original before you export.
Great, thanks, that answers that one. Paul is asking, is there any responsibility on the part of the exporter to check the HM Treasury list of sanctioned individuals or the UN control lists?
Yes, in answer to that, that's the clear answer. As part of the legislation on export control, there's a clear obligation on the exporter to ensure that they know what licenses they need, if there's any licenses, if there's any license requirement. The key part to knowing who is the exporter, there's a definition in the export control order which says it's the person who's got the rights of disposal over the goods. And if you're in that particular situation, then you need to take all steps to ensure that you know that you've got the right licenses in place to export your goods.
Thank you. We've now got Nicola, who has asked, what documents are required as proof for compliance for the trade control license?
The license will tell you what documents required. If it's the Open General Trade Control license, then it will tell you if there's a consignee or end user undertaking. If it's an open individual export license, which I was talking about, you will have the consignee undertaking, which we have a slide on, which was shown earlier. And a standard individual trade control license, you would submit our end user or stockist undertaking for that transaction. So undertaking requirements will be listed on each license if one's required, but also you will most probably need to keep the normal documents for compliance purposes of any shipments and purchase orders, etc. But all the details for what paperwork's required for a compliance purpose is listed on the Gov site, and there was a slide regarding that.
Thank you very much. Right, we've got Victoria, I think, asking, we may need to transfer design information via email that is classified under Annex 4 to a variety of countries, including Iran. What kind of license would help us transfer a high volume of design information? An OGL is not available.
Right, no OGLs available, dependent on the needs, and if it's, you're saying classified, so dependent on if you're a Listex company, you would need approval from MOD. Usually open licenses are not issued for destinations like Iran. However, standard individual licenses can be just as flexible, and you can put the high quantities on them as long as you've only got one end-use customer. So I would ask your inquirer if they have specifics or they are planning on distributing this information through a wide variety of countries, they might want to consider putting in an oil or coming to us via our helpline with more specific questions, and we will answer. Or send Claire an email at the end of this and we'll get you an answer, but give us every detail so we can compile the answer in detail.
Thank you very much. And do remember, everybody, if you do have specific questions, you can always post them on our Ask the Experts forum on the Open to Export website. Stephen is asking quite a specific question here. With regard to the relatively new oil for through life support, do you have to be the OEM and original exporter of the original equipment platform to use the oil?
In some instances where warranties, etc., have been passed over and companies have bought out other companies, as long as you can produce documentation to say that you've taken over the contract, you may be able to use this license. But every case is assessed on a case-by-case basis. But if the contract has been passed on to you because the company has merged or you've sold on the contract or something like that, then usually you are able to, as long as you can show a paper trail that you're involved in the same lifetime of the goods that were given clearance originally. If this person who's asked the question uses our facilities and has a compliance officer, they may be better off going directly to the compliance officer and asking the question. If not, drop us an email and we'll give them a more detailed answer.
Thanks very much for answering that one. We've got quite a topical one here from Anthony. He's asking, following the easement of sanctions on Iran, is the ECO seeing an increase in the numbers of applications to ship dual-use goods to Iran? And if so, is this affecting the processing time?
Okay, I think it is quite topical, you're quite right. And in terms of the Iran regulations, I think what we need to be clear on is what actually was relaxed as a result of the recent UN sanctions relief. And it was quite a specific area of sanctions that were reduced, and it related to those that have been put in place for the nuclear issues. So there was a limited range of goods that were actually precluded, oil and gas in particular, and certain dual use items. In terms of whether we've actually seen any increase, at the moment, there's a few more coming through than we actually had before, but that's really because companies are testing the market out and finding out whether or not those items that they want to export are going to be permissible. And that's what I'd actually recommend, that if you're not sure whether or not you can actually export those dual use items, to actually put an application for them into the Export Control Organisation. But please remember, there's a whole load of other items which are outside of any controls. And we hadn't been trading with Iran for a good many years, and there'd been a lot of non-controlled items that hadn't been allowed either through a range of other measures that we've just not been trading. So there'll be lots of items that you can just simply export. My advice on that would be to talk to UKTI as well about the help they're giving with trading with Iran.
Thanks very much for that answer. I think it was very comprehensive. I think we're getting short on time now, so I think we've got time for a final question. And we've got Marie, who is asking, quite a complicated question, I think. If a dual-use item for which a seal is issued gets reclassified to uncontrolled during the license validity, how should they handle future exports of that item?
Regarding the current life of the seal, you can continue to use it. If you don't require the seal, then you can surrender it on the Spire system. However, it would depend also on the country. If you've been issued a seal and the goods are no longer controlled, but you're trading in a sensitive destination equivalent to Iran or somewhere like that, then you've always got to remember that there's not only licenses required for goods that are controlled in certain destinations where there's sanctions and embargoes, or certain countries where there's no sanctions and embargoes, there could be risk of diversion, so licenses could be required because of end-use concerns. So although they may not be controlled, you always have to remember, because of sanctions, embargoes and other mitigating factors as to where the country is that you're supplying, licenses could be required for non-controlled goods.
But in less sensitive destinations, it is worth remembering that if we've decontrolled something, i.e. we've taken it off the dual use list, you don't need a license. That's the reason for decontrolling, because we don't want to control absolutely everything. So if something does become decontrolled, it's no longer on there, and it's not one of those particularly sensitive destinations that Michelle was just talking about, then you can be assured that actually you can export those items. If you have got concerns about the end use or anything, then please use the end use advice service for any information that you need to get from us.
And one last thing to add to that question, when goods were decontrolled recently, because it takes a long time to change the control list, we had a non-proliferation decontrolled OGEL. So sometimes we'll put in an open license which covers most of the world, because until the goods are removed from the control list, it's not officially decontrolled. Okay?
Thank you very much. Right, I think that's all we've got time for in terms of questions. Do rest assured that any questions you sent in will be posted on our Ask the Expert forums, and I know Claire and Michelle and their colleagues will do their best to answer them in the coming days and weeks. Do bear with us, there have been an awful lot of questions and it will take time to get them put up. So it just remains for me to thank Claire and Michelle for their time today and for covering this very complex subject so well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do rest assured also that we will be posting those links of sources of help that were at the end of the webinar at the same time as we put up the videos, so they will be available to everybody when the videos are up online. Our next webinar in this series is on the 26th of April, and it's entitled Applying for an Export License, What You Need to Know. Further afield, we have webinars in May on finding the right agents and distributors to grow overseas. In June, we have an introduction to shipping and documentation, as well as a common exporter's mistakes to avoid. And in July, we're looking at doing VAT and duties. Finally, don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can enter our Export Action Plan. And by entering this, you can win a £3,000 prize to grow your business overseas. So once again, thank you for your time and your attention, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.